Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The wind rolled hard across the high country, dragging dust in long lashes across the dry earth as the sun bled low over the Bighorn foothills. The day was quiet now, too quiet for the woman walking with a rifle slung tight across her back, and a boy and girl trailing behind her in worn boots. Mae Ellison's fingers were blistered from pulling the wagon out of mud 3 days ago. The wheels had broken outside Buffalo, and there'd been no one left to fix it. Her husband had taken the last horse and disappeared 6 months ago, chasing a silver strike in Colorado. He never came back. She had not wasted tears. Behind her, little Josie sniffled and rubbed her arm. Jamie, barely 10, kept his jaw set like he was already grown. Mae glanced back at them. "We're almost there," she said. "Just up ahead." The cabin sat alone at the edge of a dried-up creek, a lean-to barn sagging beside it. Smoke curled from the chimney. She had found the name Quinn Calder carved into the ledger at the trading post 3 miles back. The storekeep said he might be willing to trade shelter for work. Mae knocked once, firm and quick. The door opened slow, revealing a tall man with a rough beard and a quiet stare. His shirt was dusty, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and his boots were caked with trail dirt. He looked at her, then the children. "You Calder?" she asked, holding his gaze. He nodded once. "Quinn Calder." "I'm Mae Ellison. These are my children, Jamie and Josie. Our wagon broke. We walked here from Buffalo." She stood straight, chin high. "We need somewhere to stay. I can cook, sew, clean. I will work for shelter." He studied her a long second, then stepped aside. "Come in." The cabin was clean but spare. A single cot, a stove, 2 chairs, and a table. A rifle leaned against the far wall. Josie sank to the floor, too tired to care. Jamie stayed standing, eyes on the cowboy. Mae didn't sit. "We won't be here long, just until I can figure out what's next." Quinn nodded again. "You want supper?" She hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Yes." "Thank you." He didn't speak much while the beans warmed, but the way he moved, slow, sure, silent, told me enough. He had known solitude a long time. After the children fell asleep, curled up on a blanket together, Mae sat across from him at the table, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. "You live out here alone?" "4 years now." "Why?" He looked out the window. "Too many ghosts in town." She nodded, understanding that in her bones. It was late when she laid down near the hearth, keeping close to the children. Quinn didn't speak again that night. He just sat in the corner chair, staring at the fire like it might speak back. The next few days passed quiet. Mae mended a torn shirt of his, swept the cabin, and helped patch the barn roof. Jamie shadowed Quinn, learning how to check snares and how to cut wood without wasting the blade. On the 5th day, Mae stood washing clothes in the creek when Quinn came down with a bucket. He said nothing, just knelt beside her and started scrubbing. She glanced over. "You always this quiet?" He shrugged. "Words ain't ever fixed much." Mae looked out over the water. "My husband left last winter. Took our last horse, said he'd send for us. Never did." She paused. "We stayed in a church basement till spring. Then we walked." Quinn didn't answer, but he reached into the water and wrung out one of the shirts for her. That night, she found him sitting outside on the porch, elbows on knees, staring at the dark hills. She stepped out and sat beside him. The stars were bright, the kind of sky that left no room to lie to yourself. "You lost someone?" she asked. He nodded once. "Wife, son, fever took them." "Before I came here." Mae looked down at her hands. "I thought I could do it all alone, be strong enough for them, but I'm tired." He didn't speak. She turned her head toward him. "Do you need someone too?" He looked at her, then really looked, and something cracked open in his eyes. He reached out, slow but sure, and pulled her into his arms. Mae didn't resist. She let her face rest against his chest, the beat of his heart steady under her cheek. His arms were warm and solid around her. She closed her eyes. "I think," he said quietly, "I always did." The morning after, frost dusted the grass along the creek despite the sun rising clean and gold over the hills. Mae stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, stirring cornmeal into a pot. Josie sat drowsy with her head on the table, and Jamie watched Quinn through the window as he carried a small bundle of wire and wood toward the slope behind the barn. Jamie pulled on his boots. "Can I go with him, Ma?" Mae nodded without turning. "Mind your manners." Jamie was out the door before she finished the sentence. Mae didn't call after him. She trusted the boy's eyes. He didn't follow people easily, but he'd set himself after Quinn like a hound trailing heat. When the children had eaten, Mae stepped outside with a tin pail and followed the thin trail up the hill behind the cabin. The air held that crisp, late summer bite, and the sky stretched wide and cloudless over the ridge. She found Quinn kneeling near a half-buried post, fixing a snare line. Jamie handed him a thin twig, quiet as a shadow. Quinn looked up when she neared. "You need something." "I was going to fetch water from the east spring," she said, shifting the bucket to her hip. "You mind if I take the long way?" He stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees. "That path's steep after the bend. You take it alone." "I've walked worse," she said. "I'll go too," he said. "Springs run low, it's slow to fill." Jamie looked between them, unsure. Mae leaned down to him. "Stay nearby, keep your sister company." "We won't be long." The path curved along a rise of stone and dropped down toward a narrow shelf where the spring seeped out in a trickle. They walked single file with Quinn silent behind her. The quiet between them didn't feel strained, just settled. When they reached the spring, she knelt and dipped the bucket into the slow dripping pool while he crouched beside her, checking the stones around it. "You built this catch," he nodded. "Year after I came." "It's good work," she said. "Hold steady." He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "You stayed strong too long." She looked up at him. "What do you mean, you carry it all? Every hour, every mile. I seen it in your shoulders." She set the bucket down and sat back on her heels. "No one else was going to carry it for me." He scratched at the worn edge of his cuff. "You don't have to keep carrying it alone." Mae looked at him, really looked, and saw the steadiness in his voice wasn't something learned. It had grown into him the way riverbeds carve into land. He didn't offer rescue, just presence. "You're not afraid I'll stay," she said. "No," he said. "I'm afraid you won't." They walked back with the water sloshing between them. Near the barn, Josie was drawing shapes in the dust with a stick, and Jamie sat beside her, whittling a knot of wood into something with a pointed end. That evening, Mae found herself standing beside Quinn at the edge of the pasture, watching a pair of deer in the distance. The sun dropped lower, catching the edges of his face in gold. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "Not now." "Why not?" He glanced down at her, his voice low. "Because something good came walking up my trail." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I'm not good, Quinn. I'm just what's left." He didn't reach for her, not this time. Just said, "That's the part worth keeping." Later that night, after the children were asleep, she stepped out onto the porch and found him there again, sharpening a blade under the lamplight. She sat beside him, close but not touching. "Do you want me to stay?" He set the blade down. "Yes." She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his without asking, and rested her head against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. By late September, the hills wore rusted gold and the wind carried the sharp edge of coming cold. Mae stood over a row of late cabbages in the small garden behind the cabin, her hands deep in the soil. The cold had stunted them, but she dug anyway, brushing dirt from each head and laying them gently into the basket at her feet. Quinn came from the far fence line, sleeves rolled, carrying a coil of barbed wire. He paused near the corner post, glanced over, then crossed to her. "You're planting again come spring?" he asked, watching her shake soil from her palms. "I might," she said. "If there's room enough." He set the wire down. "There'll be room." She didn't look up. "You mean for Rose or for people?" He crouched beside her, resting his arms on his knees. "For both." They worked side by side in silence, lifting the last of the roots and laying them in order. When they stood, Mae's back ached and her fingers tingled from the cold. He took the basket from her without a word and carried it inside. That night, she sat beside the hearth with Josie asleep in her lap, her small breath warm against Mae's neck. Jamie dozed with a ragged quilt pulled over his legs, the wooden carving he'd been working still clutched in one hand. Quinn leaned against the doorframe, watching the fire. Mae tilted her face toward him. "You ever think of building on?" she asked. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his palm. "I've got the timber stacked," she blinked. "For what?" He met her eyes. "A second room, could use it now." Mae's throat tightened, but she nodded. "It would help." The next morning, Quinn hitched the mule to a sled and hauled the rough-cut logs from the pile near the creek bend. Mae stood on the porch, arms folded, watching him guide the animal with a quiet steadiness that had come to feel like a kind of music, low, unspoken, but always there. Jamie ran to help, dragging a rusted hammer too big for his hands. Quinn handed him a chisel and showed him how to notch a beam. Later, Mae found Quinn in the half-framed addition, measuring out where the roofline would meet the existing wall. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. He nodded. "Started it last spring. Figured I'd finish it when I had reason." She stepped into the room, bare boards beneath her boots. "And now," he didn't look at her. "Now I got reason." She leaned against the post, arms crossed. "You ever wonder what people in town would say?" He set the measuring stick aside. "Don't care. They might think we're living like man and wife." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Ain't that what we're doing?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The breeze stirred her skirt against her legs, and the smell of sawdust filled the space between them. He stepped toward her, slow and certain. "I don't need papers to know what I want." Mae felt her heart press hard against her ribs. "And what is it you want, Quinn?" He didn't touch her, just said, "You, here with me, for good." She let the silence stretch, let herself feel the weight of it. Then she said, "We'd need a third cot. Until we can build bunks for the children." "I'll put one together tomorrow," he said. That night, she curled in beside him on the cot, Josie and Jamie asleep in their corner. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. Mae rested her head against his chest. "You ever think you'd have this again?" "No," he said, "but I prayed it might find me." She breathed deep, letting the warmth of his body settle her. It did. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing dry leaves against the porch. Inside, there was nothing but breath and heartbeat and the soft creak of wood settling around them. He kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad you knocked on my door." She smiled into his shirt. "I'm glad you opened it." The first snow came early, soft as breath and light enough not to hold. Mae stood at the window, one hand resting on the sill, watching it gather along the fence rails. The smell of boiled molasses lingered in the air from her morning baking, and Josie leaned over a stool behind her, humming tunelessly as she traced patterns in a scrap of wool. Quinn had gone to the lower ridge with Jamie, taking snares and a burlap sack. They'd left before sunup, and she hadn't heard them on the path since. She wasn't worried, not exactly, but she listened for their return as she kneaded bread, as she swept, as she stitched a torn hem on Jamie's sleeve. When the door opened near dusk, the boy's boots hit the floor in quick, tired steps. His cheeks were wind-bitten and his coat dusted white. He dropped the sack near the hearth, where it slumped full with 4 rabbits and a grouse. Quinn followed behind, slower, the crease between his brows deeper than usual. He nodded to me but didn't speak. Instead, he set the rifle in the corner and poured water into the basin with deliberate care. She waited until Jamie and Josie had begun their quiet supper before stepping beside him, her voice low. "Something wrong on the ridge," he shook his head, but it wasn't an answer. "Tracks further out, not coyote, bigger, could be a cat." Mae glanced toward the children. "You think it'll come close? Doubt it, but I'll walk the perimeter tonight." She reached for the lantern before he could. "I'll walk it with you." They moved through the dark with the snow falling steady now, their boots muffled in the powder. Quinn kept to the outer line of the property, eyes sweeping the tree line, shoulders drawn tight beneath his coat. Mae spoke only once. "You ever think about what comes next?" He didn't answer at first. Then, "Some days I do. And I think about putting in more wheat, building a smokehouse, mending that western fence, maybe getting a mare if the weather holds long enough to travel." She nodded, quiet. He stopped near the edge of the southern fence, lantern held high. "And you?" She looked up at him, snow clinging to her lashes. "I think about staying, teaching Josie her letters, helping Jamie skin whatever he brings in. I think about waking up beside you for the rest of my life." A long breath passed between them. "You sure?" he asked, voice rough. "I've lived enough years not to mistake comfort for love," she said. He set the lantern down, careful in the snow, and took her face in both hands. "I've got no gold, Mae, no promises of ease." "I didn't walk this far for ease," she said. He kissed her, then not rushed, not hungry, just steady and full. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. When they pulled back, her breath shook. "We'll need to build that bunk for the children soon." "I'll start it tomorrow," he said. She leaned into him, forehead to his chest. "You were right that night. I was carrying too much. And now I don't have to." They walked back toward the cabin, snow deepening behind them, the lantern swinging low between their steps. Inside, the fire burned clean and low, and two children slept tucked beneath thick quilts. Mae took Quinn's hand and led him across the threshold, the door closing behind them, quiet as a vow. By early November, the cold had settled in for good. Wood smoke hung constant in the air, and the creek behind the cabin had crusted over with thin ice that snapped underfoot. Quinn finished the bunk frame in the corner of the new room, setting it solid against the wall with a carpenter's care. Mae stuffed ticking into the mattress sacks, her stitches tight, her hands steady. Jamie helped fetch straw and tied bundles with twine. Josie sat cross-legged nearby, piecing scraps of cloth into a patchwork square under Mae's quiet guidance. The days passed in rhythm, now chores shared, meals warm, the cabin no longer a place of waiting but of living. One morning, Quinn returned from the eastern ridge with a buck slung over the mule's back, frost clinging to his beard. At the sight of me on the porch, her shawl drawn close, he said, "Tracks on the south trail. Wagon, single axle, not a neighbor I know." Mae stepped down to meet him. "Coming this way?" "Looks like it." She nodded, her voice even. "Then we'll be ready if it does." The wagon came into view by afternoon, drawn by a sway-backed horse and driven by a man whose face she hadn't seen in nearly a year. Josie and Jamie were inside, and Mae stepped forward before they could react. She didn't raise her voice. "Turn around, Dilly." He pulled the reins and squinted up at her. "I heard you were out here. Thought maybe you'd see reason." Quinn stepped beside her, silent and unmoving. Mae didn't flinch. "You left us without food or coin. We walked through snow and slept in barns. Whatever reason you think I'll see, you're late by a year and a half." Ellie's eyes darted to Quinn. "So this is what you chose, a stranger." "I didn't choose a man," she said. "I chose a life where I'm not forgotten." Ellie's mouth twisted, but he said nothing else. He turned the horse with an angry tug, and neither Mae nor Quinn watched him go. Inside, the children sat at the table, wide-eyed. Mae knelt and put one hand on each of theirs. "No one's coming to take us from here," she said. "You understand?" Jamie nodded, slow but certain. Josie leaned into Mae's shoulder and didn't speak. That night, after the children slept, Mae sat at the edge of Quinn's cot, brushing her hair out in slow strokes. "I thought seeing him would shake something loose in me," she said, "but it didn't. I only felt tired." Quinn sat beside her, his hands folded between his knees. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," she said. "But I needed to see it." They sat quiet for a while, the fire casting low light across the floor. Then Mae said, "I want to be your wife." He turned his head. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. We've built something here, not from grief, not from fear, from steadiness. From care." He reached for her hand. "I'll ride to town come spring. Get papers if you want them." "I want the name," she said. "But not for the law, for the children, for me. I want to be Mae Calder." "You already are," he said. They rose early the next morning. Mae baked cornbread and washed the children's clothes with melted snow. Quinn chopped wood until the pile stood shoulder high. The day passed quiet, but the air between them had changed, settled into something deeper than comfort. Something chosen. Winter pressed in with heavy snow by December, but the cabin held firm. Josie learned to stitch her letters into cloth. Jamie trapped a fox and tanned the pelt with Quinn's help. Mae taught them to make lye soap from ashes and fat, her voice calm and even, her hands never still. In February, Quinn carved a ring from a scrap of deer antler. He didn't present it to her with words. He simply slid it onto her finger one morning while she poured coffee, and she looked down and smiled, slow and sure. By March, the thaw had begun. The creek ran again, low but clear, and green laced the edges of the hills. Mae planted early potatoes. Quinn repaired the roof where snow had warped a beam. The children ran barefoot through the wet grass, their laughter high and unguarded. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the sun melt behind the hills, Mae leaned into Quinn's side and said, "I never thought I'd have this." He rested his hand over hers. "You earned every inch of it." She turned toward him, her face open and soft. "I love you, Quinn." "I love you too, Mae." They didn't kiss right then. They just sat hand in hand as the sky darkened and the frogs began to sing from the creek. Spring came fully in April. The garden grew. The cabin stood strong. The bunk held fast and the children grew taller by the day. Quinn and Mae slept each night with the windows cracked, the air carrying the smell of thawed earth and pine. And in that quiet land, stitched together by care and time, they built a life not from what they had lost, but from what they had found: each other. Always each other.